Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon to this afternoon's ranked choice voting informational session geared towards nonprofit and civic leaders. Off the top, I'd just like to remind everyone that this afternoon's webinar is being recorded, and this recording will be shared as well to keep promoting ranked choice voting through education and as information to voters and to residents. My name is Aljan Rafael Bonilla, and I'm the Executive Vice President of the Fund for the City of New York. Since 1968, the Fund for the City of New York has been working on strengthening and innovating the nonprofit sector, as well as the public sector in New York City government. Today's topic on ranked choice voting is a very important one because many voters in 2019, over 75%, close to 75% of voters in the ballot initiative voted to have ranked choice voting in our local elections. So we're happy to be able to communicate this information today to nonprofit and civil leaders. I want to thank our panelists, which Juan will introduce shortly, as well as their institutional affiliations. But I'd like to thank from the onset our co-sponsors, which is the Asian American Federation, the YMCA of Greater New York, the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College, the New York Urban League, and the Chinese Planning Council. I want to thank Juan. Of course, everybody knows Juan, so he needs no introduction, but I will anyway, from NALEO, for helping convene this important discussion. I think in New York City, we take for granted, because of our size and scale, how incredible, how remarkable we are in terms of what we do around elections, democracy, and governance, and the scale at which we do it. So New York City alone will be the largest setting implementation for ranked choice voting in the whole country, right? That's not insignificant. So the national eyes will be watching, and this type of government reform will very much be center stage. Also, when you think about it, Brooklyn alone is like the United States' third largest city. Queens being like its fifth largest city, and the Bronx being the whole United States, if it was by itself, eighth largest city. So the scale at which this is being done is not insignificant. It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. And we're very excited to hear from the panelists for not only a local perspective, a citywide perspective, but also a national perspective as well. I'd like to turn now to Juan Rosa, who will be introducing our panelists. But first, let me say a few words about Juan, even though everybody knows Juan, but it's important for us to give a formal introduction. Because Juan wants to make sure, right? He curated the speakers and the panelists very carefully. And he keeps telling me today that our main goal is to make sure that we communicate accurate and up-to-date information, right? Stressing the importance of this, but also to give individuals an opportunity to ask questions, right? There is no wrong question. And to make sure that we're able to put resources in the chat room or in our different platforms so that nonprofit leaders and civic leaders can access these resources to help them as they communicate the message to their constituents. So Juan Rosa is the Northeast Director of Civic Engagement with NALEO Education Fund, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. Is the leading nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that facilitates full Latino participation in the American political process, from citizenship to public service. Since 1990, decennial census, NALEO has led campaigns to promote a complete and accurate count of the nation's Latino community. Juan leads the organization's work in the Northeast Corridor, from Pennsylvania to Massachusetts. Prior to his role in NALEO, Juan was community school director with Catholic Charities Alianza Division and held various positions in the New York State Assembly and the New York City Council. So without further ado, I turn it over to you, Juan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aldrin, for the introduction and for the kind words. They are just kind words. Don't believe them. I'm just glad to be in your company doing this work, Aldrin. So we have a star panel today who are going to speak about their experiences and their advice on ranked choice voting. First, I would like to introduce Rose Pierre-Louis, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the Max Silver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research at NYU. Rose is a highly recognized public sector leader who is known for driving social and economic change. Aside from her responsibilities at the Max Silver Institute, Rose is also on the board of directors of Eleanor's Legacy and of the New American Leaders Action Fund. And she founded the Frederick Douglass Boulevard Alliance, a small business organization, in 2013. Rose is a former Deputy Manhattan Borough President, just like Aldrin Bonilla, and is also a former commissioner of the Mayor's Office to Combat Domestic Violence. Rose, it's a pleasure to have you on here. Rose's role today is that she is on the board of Rank the Vote NYC, and she's going to talk a little bit about later what Rank the Vote is doing and how it is implementing this work. Next up, we have Ali Swatek. Ali is the Director of Policy and Research at the New York City Campaign Finance Board, where she helps New Yorkers better understand how campaigns are funded and how voters participate in our democracy. The CFB administers New York City's Public Matching Funds program, provides campaign finance disclosure, and engages voters through NYC Votes. Prior to her work at the CFB, Ali helped improve city government by serving on the 2019 NYC Charter Revision Commission and supported corporate responsibility at JP Morgan. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from NYU and a public administration degree from the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome, Ali. Next up, we're privileged to have with us Maria Perez. And Maria spent 10 years as a healthcare practitioner before turning to policy, equity, and advocacy work, which she has been doing for the past 8 years. She served as campaign lead and later as interim hub manager for the California Endowment's project, Building Healthy Communities, and as director of Fair Vote New Mexico. More recently, she's been a campaign manager for Common Cause in New Mexico and is the co-director of Democracy Rising. Welcome, Maria. Maria joins us from New Mexico today. Last, but definitely not least, we have Jose Miranda Jr., who is Director of Programs at Shaya Development Corporation. Shaya is a community development corporation based in Queens, New York. At Shaya, Jose is responsible for overseeing direct services for the South Asian and Indo-Caribbean diaspora of New York City, as well as leading advocacy organizing and civic engagement work. Jose has a passion for social justice and 15 years of experience in personal finance and nonprofit sector. Before joining Shaya, Jose was responsible for the design, implementation, and management of a program that ensures the escalation of sustainable financial counseling services at the national level. Jose is a firm believer in human-centered design in program services and learning. He lives in Harlem. So welcome, Rose, welcome Ali, welcome Maria, welcome Jose, and Aldrin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juan. Like I mentioned in the offset, there's national examples of ranked choice voting, and we have local examples already that have voted using this method, and we're going to learn more about the intricacies of it and get a nice sense of the background. So I want to begin with Rose and Ali, asking Rose and Ali a couple of questions. To begin with Rose first, why do I get a sense, actually for Rose and Ali, you know when former Vice President Biden turned to Obama after the Affordable Care Act and said, this is a really freaking big deal. Did you get that moment that this is a really freaking big deal? Rose, tell us about Rank the Vote New York City and why it helped promote ranked choice voting and why is it so important in terms of democracy and governance.
Thank you so much, former Deputy Borough President Aldrin Bonilla, and to my former colleague in city government, Juan Rosa, and to Naleo, and to the Fund for the City of New York, and to all of the sponsors of this event, and of course the panels. I do think ranked choice voting is a big deal for really good reasons. And just to give a little bit of background about Rank the Vote NYC, which I'm very proud to serve on the board of. Rank the Vote NYC was created as a not-for-profit organization in 2019 as part of coalition efforts to bring ranked choice voting to New York City. Conversations, bills have been presented about ranked choice voting, contrary to what people may be saying that it happened under the cover of night. It's been for many, many years that ranked choice voting has been talked about. And so in 2019, when ranked choice voting was put on the ballot for New York City voters to consider, Rank the Vote NYC came together as a coalition to help advocate for the benefits of ranked choice voting. And after the historic win, where New Yorkers chose to support ranked choice voting, upwards of 75%, Rank the Vote NYC is now focused on education efforts throughout New York City in partnership with partners at the Campaign Finance Board, and certainly with community-based organizations like the ones represented here, elected officials, religious institutions, to make sure that we get the word out and participate in education efforts like this about RCV. The most important thing that I would say about the impact of ranked choice voting and why I think it's a big freaking deal is that I really feel that it helps to give New Yorkers more choice on the ballot, which is important. It's proven to help elect an increased representation of women, people of color, and first-time candidates to office. It eliminates runoff elections, which are often costly and low turnout. Also eliminates the runoff, the spoiler effect, which happens a lot in many of the races, and also has allowed for new emergent voices to be part of the conversation. And I also think, very different than the process from before, ranked choice voting, in order to win, you have to have a majority of the vote, which is 50% plus one. Just think about under the old system, you have in some city council races, people winning with only 20% of the vote. So this is a really big deal, a really important step towards inclusive democracies. I think Allie probably knows this better than I do. I think there are 450 people running for city council, tremendous diversity, both racially and ethnically. And I'm so glad that I have the chance to participate in this conversation along with our not-for-profit and civic leaders to really talk about RCV.
Thank you so much, Rose. I'm gonna ask Ali, because Ali, but stay on Rose, because I'm gonna still ask you questions too, more of a little discussion. But for Ali, if you could turn your mic on. You were in the Charter Commission, so you were like in the room where it happened and where the sausage was made. So, and now you're also on the other end of it, having to explain and educate and inform constituents and voters in terms of the implementation and the execution of what that ballot initiative actually meant for voters. Can you tell us a little bit about the process that the Campaign Finance Board now has for educating New York City voters on ranked choice voting, but also at the time when you were in the room where it happened, kind of some of the discussions, and then you see how they're playing out now in terms of the implementation of it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I'm really happy to be here and continue talking about ranked choice voting, which I do every day. Aldrin, you correctly identified that I gave myself the job of doing this by accident through working at the Charter Revision Commission and designating the Campaign Finance Board as being in charge of doing voter education and outreach campaigns, specifically to introduce ranked choice voting to New Yorkers, because as we know, this is the first year we're using it. So just speaking a little bit off of what Rose mentioned about this being a big deal, it was really exciting to, first of all, learn about ranked choice voting. When I worked at the Charter Revision, I didn't know anything about it until I worked there. And then advocates brought up that they wanted to change the way we elected the city council and the mayor. And I thought, this sounds kind of cool. So it was exciting to go through the process of hearing from voters and advocacy groups and community groups who identified these flaws in the way that we elect our officials, and also identified a solution for it, or, you know, we'll see how it turns out this year, but, you know, we're eliminating runoff elections, which I think is huge. And from the CFB's perspective, we've done voter education and outreach for about a decade, when the NYC Votes initiative moved over from the mayor's office to the CFB. So we're really excited to be a part of educating New Yorkers on this new way of voting. And one other thing that I'll mention is just, we can't do this alone. Like, we have the support of Rank the Vote and other community organizations. NALEO has been an incredible partner as well. And it truly does take all hands on deck in order to do this effectively, because there are 4.5 million registered voters in New York. We are, I think you mentioned this as well, we're the largest place to use ranked choice voting in the whole country. And so it's really exciting to be a part of it.
Rose, in terms of, so ranked choice voting, voters will now have an opportunity to rank their candidates based on their preference, from 1 to 5. 1, their most preferred candidate, all the way to 5, let's say their least preferred, but they don't have to do all 5. They can do 3 or their top 2 preferences. As you go around and travel throughout New York City and speak, I know you were recently in a school, I think, speaking to students, your different civic organizations. What's the best way, or the best analogy or metaphor that you use to get people to really get that aha moment, that, you know, get their anxiety levels low, that it's not that complicated in reality, and that this is something that we can do and do successfully?
So you're right. Yesterday, I spoke to students at Monroe College, and it was a different kind of presentation because it's not your traditional webinar format. And so the first thing that I asked the students was to rank from 1 to 5 their favorite hip hop artists. And it was just a great way to use names that they knew to help them, along with the presentation, understand ranked choice voting. I do feel that in my experience, I'm sure Ali and others know this, that once you present to people and give them sort of sample or mock elections. So for example, at Rank the Vote NYC, we just launched a new mock election that everyone can participate. Maybe I can drop it into the chat for everybody, that allows you to rank important women who are figures in New York City. And I just literally did it before I got on. And I find that it's a way to demystify it. I know that there will be, over the next couple of months, a lot of public education efforts around ranked choice voting and to demystify the process. I think once people understand, oh, this is how I know, you know, how to complete the ballot, and I understand what the ballot's going to look like, I think people become at ease and kind of really understand the benefits of ranked choice voting. Don't have to worry about just reducing your vote to one person. You have more options, you have more choices. You get to identify people that are aligned with the issues that are of importance to you. And so I think once we talk about the benefits of RCV combined with some really good illustrative examples, people really relax. And the other thing is that being able to do this for monolingual speakers. So last night, Rank the Vote NYC, Councilmember Pierre-Louis and Senator Zellner Myrie and a number of Haitian-led organizations, we did an RCV training in Haitian Creole. So there's so many resources in different languages so that we can reach people. There are efforts also to reach our seniors who we know always get out there to vote. But my experience is the minute that people have the opportunity to practice and really understand about ranked choice voting and to demystify it, people really get the benefits.
That's great. So you would say for nonprofit and civic leaders, there's resources out there to help them have mock elections and practice elections and help through these hands-on activities to help demystify ranked choice voting.
And you can create, if you go to our website, Rank the Vote NYC, when you participate in an election, a mock election, you can create your own election. So I've done mock elections for my friends and colleagues. We did one specifically for NYU, where I work, that was specialized to NYU. But between our partner organizations, entities like the CFB, if you ever get a chance to go to Allie's trainings, please do. It's one of the best I've ever been to, and just helped me as a new person at RCV understand it. But there are a number of partner organizations that have resources, but certainly if you follow us on social media, for Rank the Vote NYC, both on Facebook, IG, and Twitter. There are a lot of resources. And certainly I know for campaign finance and the Board of Election, I know there's some additional resources. And certainly if you're looking for something that does not exist, I hope your partner organizations will reach out to us, to one of us, to make sure that we can work with you in partnership to develop that and to provide the resources that you need.
Yes, thank you. And Ali, speaking of additional resources, I mean, this is really your area of expertise as well. Can you tell us how ranked choice voting, the elections will be different from the point of view of the voter and what the voters need to understand as they head to the polls?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I start out my training a lot of the time by telling folks, this is new information. I like to level set that way because it's okay to be a little surprised or feel uncomfortable about what you're being presented with. I've never voted in a ranked choice voting election, and I've been talking about RCV for going on 3 years now. So when I go to the ballot, when I go to fill out my ballot at a poll site, my brain is going to give me that ping, this is new. This is kind of something that you're not used to doing. And that's okay. That's you're designed to do that. So don't be afraid. We're trying something new. And it is intuitive, I think, is the important thing to emphasize there. So what we're trying to emphasize first is just, filling out your ballot is the first step. Everyone needs to know how to do that. You can rank 5 choices in order of preference instead of just 1. That's really cool. As far as how that's different from other localities, and I am certainly not the expert in this, Maria is, and maybe she'll talk about this a little more later, but I know that there's some places that only rank 3. San Francisco ranks a maximum of 10. That's a lot. When we were deciding how many ranks to allow, we were like 5 seems like a good middle ground there. And in New York, we are only using ranked choice voting for special and primary elections for mayor, public advocate, comptroller, borough president, and city council. So in almost all other municipalities, they just have one election that decides the winner of the race. But we, of course, have primary elections and then generals. And so it's really important for voters to know that we're using RCV in specials and primaries, but we are not using it in general elections. Those will still be single choice, even for city elections.
So as Rose mentioned, so in the past, someone may have been able to get elected with, let's say, 30% of the vote, meaning 70% of the people did not vote for that winning candidate. Under ranked choice voting, this increases the likelihood, would you say, that the person who has the 51% or more will be either the first or second preference of a majority of people? And hence people can say, well, my number 1 candidate didn't win, but at least I have my second best preference.
Yeah, I think that's the coolest thing for voters. You get to participate in electing the winner, even if you didn't rank that person first. And I think that we've had a number of situations, at least that I can think back of, when I've voted, where I've thought, I really like this person, but I don't really think that there's a chance they're going to win. And I really dislike this one candidate that's running. So I'm kind of conflicted about who I should vote for, the person who I think would be the best at this office in this role, or the person who I think it's most likely to win. So instead of having that choice and to have to choose between one of those people, you can rank both of them, which I think is really cool. The other thing that I'll say about why this is cool for voters is why it's cool for candidates is you get elected with the greatest mandate. Instead of just having 33% of the vote and being the winner of a plurality race, in ranked choice voting, since you can't win with 33% of the vote, you get to see how much actual support you have in that district. How many people would choose you second? How many people would choose you third? How many people would think you do a good job at this role? You're not their favorite, but they would still choose you over other folks that are running in that race. So for candidates, I think that part's cool too.
It's a great point. It actually might make a big difference for how people run their campaigns and also the type of issues that get addressed. Thank you so much. I want to thank Rose. I want to thank Ali. We're going to come back to you, but I'm going to turn it over to Juan now, who's going to get a national perspective and a very local perspective from the Queens 31st District, which has recently had an election using the ranked choice voting methodology. So next, I turn it to Juan. Juan, all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aldrin, and thank you so much to Ali and Rose. Ali is by far the most knowledgeable expert on ranked choice voting, and Rose and her colleagues at Rank the Vote NYC are doing a fabulous job of penetrating local communities with messaging and education. So thank you both. I will like to take the opportunity to remind our viewers that ranked choice voting is going to be used only for those offices in city government. So it will only be for mayor, controller, public advocate, member of city council. It will not touch the district attorneys that we have in the 5 boroughs, and will not touch state offices. In some instances, voters in New York City are going to be faced with both styles of voting when they go to the polls this June. So for example, in Manhattan, we have a Manhattan DA primary, which will not be ranked choice voting. So our voters will be interacting with ranked choice voting for the city elections, except for the judicial posts to civil court and to the district attorney's office. They are in certain places where Democratic Party or Republican Party offices as well, like district leader, Democratic State Committee member, county committee members. Those will not be interacting with ranked choice voting. So again, our voters will have 2 styles of voting in certain localities. So we really need to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to equip voters with knowledge before they visit the polls. So at this point, I would like to bring up Maria Perez, who is co-director of Democracy Rising, and Jose Miranda Jr., who is director of programs at Shaya Community Development Corporation. As Aldrin mentioned, what we're going to do now is sort of have a national perspective on ranked choice voting, and definitely Maria is going to give us that sort of macro perspective of how ranked choice voting has been promoted in other localities. And then Jose is going to really walk us through how Chaya CDC helped voters in Queens 24th District this past February in terms of learning about ranked choice voting. So Maria, I'm going to start with you. And my question to you is just to please let us know what you've done on promoting ranked choice voting. And then very quickly, I will have you go into what challenges have you encountered in doing this work? What challenges have partners encountered in doing this work and promoting and educating voters about ranked choice voting? Again, Maria, we're very happy to have you with us all the way from Santa Fe, New Mexico. And please let us know what you've done on ranked choice voting and also what challenges you've encountered at the local level promoting it and implementing it. And thank you again.
Sure. Thank you so much, Juan, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all today. Again, my name is Maria Perez. I'm co-director of an organization called Democracy Rising, and we work with community leaders on the ground who are trying to advocate for election reform in their communities. And then we also work on the implementation side of things, particularly around ranked choice voting. I got my feet wet on ranked choice voting. I guess my first experience is I used to live in Oakland, California. So when I moved there, there was a mayoral election, and I, interacted with a ranked ballot without knowing anything about it at that time. And it made perfect sense to me without having had any education on it. It was just an intuitive process going through the ballot. It made sense to, figure out who you like the best and who you like second best, and sort of identify your backup choices. But I really started working on ranked choice voting back in 2017, when the city of Santa Fe, the voters in Santa Fe, where I live and work now, had passed ranked choice voting with a wide margin on a ballot question also, like the voters of New York City did. But the city had decided not to implement for 10 years. They just didn't want to do it. And they got around not doing it. So I was hired to push the city to actually implement their charter. And that was a big fight, but we won. And when the city was mandated to actually implement on that election cycle, we had 9 weeks to educate the voters. And that was my job. On the nonprofit sector, that was my job. So I really learned quickly, right? It was a steep learning curve in terms of what's the best way to reach voters, how to best work with the jurisdiction, how could the city reach some voters, and how could me and my coalition leaders on the nonprofit sector and the community side of things fill those gaps where the city wasn't able to reach the voters. And what we learned very quickly is the city was great at reaching voters sort of at a 30,000 foot level. They could get on the news, they could get on the newspaper, they could sort of do big messaging, but it was very difficult for the city to actually get in the little nooks and crevices of the community itself, which is where we came in. Like I said, we had 9 weeks to educate the voters in Santa Fe. It's a very small city, so it's nothing like what you guys are facing right now. But after that, that was a very successful voter education campaign. The election went great. Voters were engaged. They were ranking. 65% of the voters ranked all their rankings on their ballot. So it was very clearly very effective, the work that we did to educate the voters. And since then, due to that, I've been involved in voter education efforts with ranked choice voting all over the country in small jurisdictions, bigger jurisdictions. Something that was very interesting that I did last year was I was in charge of helping educate the voters in the 4 states where the Democratic Party ran their primaries with a ranked ballot. So that was Alaska, Hawaii, Kansas, and Wyoming. So we were working with party leaders in those states on how to educate the voters, and that also went very well. So, this is something that I love to do. I think voter education is so important. I would say the biggest challenge that I have encountered is that, in my mind, voter education should be happening 365 days out of the year. And usually it's sort of an afterthought, right? People, it tends to be this whole get out the vote and voter education efforts tend to happen just a couple months before an election. And that's just entirely not enough time when you're talking about introducing a new voting system to the voters. Voting can be very intimidating to people, especially in this political climate, right? There's a lot of questions like, is it rigged, right? Is my vote gonna count? People have there's a lot of emotional charge around just the act of voting. So having time to really talk about it in a calm way, in a conversational way, to normalize what's going on and not just, drop something on people's lap, like there's a new way of voting and you better be aware, that is definitely a challenge. And then another huge challenge that I've encountered is this whole issue about language access, right? These voter education campaigns and messaging are usually, if not always, basically developed in English language and then translated as needed or as there's capacity to do so. And that just doesn't work very well with some languages, right? I think that it's really important to develop messaging and develop education materials in the original language that you are going to be presenting it to. You know, people, if you're a monolingual speaker and you get information that was developed in English and then Google translated, like, you know that, right? And it doesn't really feel that great. So those, I would say those are the main challenges. Lack of time and sort of a lack of proper thinking and planning around language access.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you for offering what you believe, what you've in your experience have seen as challenges. And with those challenges in mind, we want to turn to Jose over at Chaya. And Jose, if you could just start by talking to us a little bit about what you do at Chaya, what Chaya does in their community, and in your opinion, how does what you do, what Chaya does in those communities, allow it to build trust among community members, allow it to be a trusted messenger to its constituents and its clients. Welcome, Jose.
Great. Thank you, Juan. Yeah, so Chaya is primarily a direct service organization. So we're providing, year-round services around, housing counseling, pre-purchase counseling, financial counseling, free tax prep. So we're really embedded in the community, and folks sort of know us for the types of services that they come to. They look at Chaya as a resource. They're often coming to us for problems that we can't necessarily immediately solve for and have to try to figure out with them. So I think that's a big piece of sort of building trust with communities when it comes to educating them around things like ranked choice voting. We're not just folks that are coming and knocking on your door or hosting events, a month or two before an election comes up. We're there year round. So there is a level of trust there. There is some familiarity when folks are uncertain about things or have questions. They're more open to engaging in a dialogue than, someone just trying to shove a flyer in their face who they've never met before to get them some information.
So that familiarity, right? Building the familiarity, people, faces that they see and trust and can turn to for information. Going back to Maria, you spoke a little bit about, the challenge sometimes in government led outreach efforts is that it could feel that it's a very a far removed effort, right? Not that familiar. So I think here in New York, we're really hoping that nonprofits, community organizations can really spring up and do some of this work in recognizing that it is a very tough environment right now with the crises that are engulfing our communities, not only the public health crisis with COVID, but also the financial crisis that some of our communities are undergoing. And very, very honestly, the budget crises and the budget issues that some of our nonprofit partners are encountering in this environment. Understanding that, right, keeping that in mind, what do you think is the role of community organizations, neighborhood associations to help promote ranked choice voting? And if you could talk a little bit about any example that stand out from your time in Hawaii or New Mexico or Oakland, and that would be great.
Yeah, so, I believe that the community-based organizations are really the key to this whole thing, right? It's not, I don't think that you can really have a robust and successful voter education plan and program without the participation of community-based organizations on the ground. The way that I do my work, and we, I did this when we were working in Hawaii and Alaska and all those places, and I did it locally in Santa Fe and in other locations that I've worked on voter education. The model that I use is to have a mini grant program where, you start finding out, right, who the community organizations are on the ground, who their constituencies are, how do they do their work, how do they reach people, right? And then form partnerships with them, grant them a little bit of money. Usually it's not that much because we're talking about an organization that is dealing with a small constituency, right? Whether it's a neighborhood or whether it's like an issue area. So, usually it's like $10,000 or less, mini grant. So, and then partner with them in terms of like, okay, this is the message that needs to go out. These are the key things that you need to tell your constituents. You figure out what the best way to deliver that message is. Let's work together on just making sure that the right information is being delivered, but you leave it up to that community-based organization to do what they already know how to do, which is communicate information to their constituencies, right? So that has been key. I want to share with you all sort of like a best practice that I discovered early on here in Santa Fe in terms of engaging community organizations, because a lot of the times community-based organizations have nothing to do with voting, right? They may be working on food security or housing or whatever it is, but it's really key to connect with those organizations. So something I learned early on was figuring out how to make this palatable to the organization itself, and sort of like cross that bridge so that they can talk about voting when that's not something that they work on. So I was working with a community organization here in Santa Fe. It's a transit justice organization. And we were trying to figure out, okay, we gave them a mini grant to go canvas, right? Door knocking. How are they going to talk about this? And what we came up with is we developed a ballot that had the candidates on that ballot were 5 issues surrounding transit, right? Should we have more bus stops? Should the bus run later? Whatever the questions were. And when people, when the canvassers went to knock on doors, they would say, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm from this organization. Again, they're already trusted messengers, right? The community already knows them. And they said, we have a ballot here for you to help us understand what your priorities are in terms of transit justice in our city. Can you please rank these issues in order of importance to you? They would hand the person a ballot, right? A material ballot. People, without needing to be told how, just very intuitively, everybody was able to say, this is the most important issue to me, and this is the second most important issue to me, and so forth. Great. At the end of that sort of like kinetic experience, the canvasser would say, thank you so much. This information is invaluable to us. And by the way, a municipal election is coming up and your ballot's going to look just like this. You're going to be asked to rank candidates in order of preference. People said, great. They got it. They already practiced on a ballot. The community organization got really invaluable data, right, from the community. And it was a win-win for everybody. So that, I thought, was one of the key learnings and one of the best practices that I have found in doing this work in terms of engaging community-based organizations.
Yeah, that's a really good strategy. I'm reminded that when we were offline a little earlier, Rose was sharing that during her presentation last night, I believe, at Monroe College, the game that they played with the student audience was to ask them to rank their top 5 hip hop artists, right? So it's that idea of bringing what you're using to promote ranked choice voting, really making it about the audience that you're interacting with. And but that's really exciting, because not only did the transit organization was able to promote ranked choice voting, but they're also able to collect information that they needed anyway for the programming. So that's really, really, really cool. Turning to Jose a little bit, Jose, can you tell us a little bit about what Chaya did for or around the special elections in the 24th district? The 24th district in Queens was the first New York City jurisdiction to try out this new version of ranked choice voting on February 2nd. So we want to talk about a little bit how that went, how Chaya was involved, and any lessons that your colleagues learned, Jose, while doing this work. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, like you mentioned, February 2nd, first time we got to sort of practice this. And so Chaya went into action probably around early mid-December of last year to really start to get the word out about both the fact that a special election was happening, which often falls off the radar. There's not enough, a lot of publicity around things like special elections, and also that there'd be this sort of new format to how you'd be voting. So one of the things that we did was we worked with our partners at APA Voice, which is a coalition of organizations serving Asian Pacific Americans, And we put together, candidate forums, which is something that the CHAYA does on a regular basis. But we integrated some education around ranked choice voting into that candidate forum. So folks who are more politically engaged, want to hear how candidates work, as they're thinking about this, right, they're also learning about ranked choice voting at the same time. So maybe possibly like in their heads, they're sort of starting to do a little bit of that ranking sort of in their heads around some of these issues. They're not just thinking about where's my initial vote going or where's my vote going, but now they're starting to think about, well, I like this candidate a little bit better than that one, and this one sort of a little bit less, or that one more. So it starts to sort of like build that a little bit of sort of mental experience around that. Another thing I want to emphasize, I should have emphasized with your last question was, a lot of the work that we try to do is in language. So we had interpretation there in Spanish and Bangladeshi and Mandarin to make sure that, we're able to reach people in languages that they're more comfortable in when introducing new topics. That's obviously really important. We do a lot of on the ground work in the district, as I mentioned before. That includes building tenant associations. And so we talked to our tenant leaders as well and educated them so that they could further do education to other members, to members of their community. And, despite the pandemic, we also did a lot of street outreach, just reaching people kind of where they are, tabling in high traffic areas in Jamaica, passing out things like sample ballots, explaining it to folks, sort of talking them through it, doing events with partners like India Home and Rank the Vote, right? Getting as much information out as possible. And as I mentioned before, because people are sort of familiar with these faces, right? CHAYA is in the community. These are faces that sort of look like you, that speak the same languages. Being able to react to something like a sample ballot gives them the opportunity to ask a lot of questions, right? It's not this sort of hypothetical thing in your head. You sort of look at it, and when you have questions and don't understand what it looks like, you're able to engage with some of our staff members. So I think that was also really, really important, is like talking to as many people on the ground as possible to think about that sort of like visual learning modality as well.
Well, thank you so much, Jose, and thank you, Maria. So we wanted to give you that national experience, right? How other localities have interacted with ranked choice voting, but also a very close to home local experience, which is the one that CHAYA had. Doing community education for their constituents in the District 24th in Queens. At this point, we're going to bring the back of the panel back on, and we're going to ask the panelists the same question, and they'll take a minute each just telling us what they think. So the question for Ali, for Rose, for Maria, and for Jose is to please, or it's more like a statement. So please share one activity or one strategy that nonprofit organizations, community organizations, and neighborhood civic leaders can implement to help educate and empower their constituents or clients about ranked choice voting. So one activity or strategy that people can do in their own organizations to help promote and educate the community about ranked choice voting. So we'll do Maria, Ali, Rose, Jose. Maria, Ali, Rose, Jose, in that order.
Okay, thank you, Juan. I think the most important thing that we've seen evidence of being the best strategy really is to show people a ballot, right? A ballot, it doesn't have to be the exact ballot. Actually, I recommend that you don't use a ballot with the actual candidates' names on it, because A, people can be confused and think that they already voted, and B, people get really charged about candidates, right? So use a ballot with whatever. It could be hip hop singers, it can be your favorite sandwich, it doesn't matter, but just have people look at what a ballot's gonna look like and actually physically get a pen and fill in a bubble. That is the key. And then as part of that, I think that just normalizing ranked choice voting, right? So like never, when you're talking to voters about ranked choice voting, never get into the how. Please just stick to the what, right? And maybe the why if you have time, but don't get into like the math of it, the algorithms. People get confused, people get intimidated, people don't even want to hear about it. So stick to the what. This is what's coming, new type of voting in our elections. This is what your ballot's gonna look like. And remember, you rank stuff in your life every day, right? You choose, you want a Coke, and if they don't have a Coke, you want a Pepsi, right? Like we rank stuff every day. So reminding people that they're used to ranking, they're just not used to ranking candidates.
I love that answer, Maria. I think that, so for us at the CFB, since we do voter education in every year, not just municipal election years, I think for us, it's really important to ground messaging in general voter education if you're talking about ranked choice voting. So if people aren't interested in voting in their local elections because they don't realize what the mayor does or what the city council does, or how the city council votes on issues that impact them, or how, you know, housing preservation and development is a city agency that impacts them, I think that folks won't be interested in voting to begin with. So I think just making sure that people know, you know, you pick your city's leadership for the next several years through municipal elections. City government is incredibly powerful in New York. We provide so many direct services to our residents, which is incredible. And a lot of how that money is spent is determined by local elected officials who you're going to elect using ranked choice voting this year. So I think grounding it in the importance of local elections in general is really important, and a good strategy if especially for organizations that don't normally do civic education.
So in the spirit of, you know, the focus of today's conversation in terms of not-for-profit and civic leaders, I really think it's important to partner with the organizations that are indigenous to the communities that are hard to reach, communities of color, those that are trusted, and to provide train the trainer training to all of their staff members, because they are on the front lines, particularly during COVID, interacting with the public and the constituents that are at the heart of who we're trying to reach, particularly through outreach efforts. So continuing to identify who those organizations are, who have the credibility in communities, and to make sure that we continue this process of creating experts in the mold of Maria and Ali and others who are doing this work, so that we can, whether you're in an elevator or giving out flyers or in the supermarket, that everyone in the not-for-profit and civic community is trained on RCV, and at the drop of the dime can really, to the point that I really love about Maria, give the what is happening. And if I get asked about the algorithm, I'm going to say call Maria or Ali.
And Jose.
Sure. I think the biggest takeaway that we have is that, like, actually seeing and interacting with a ballot raises the most question, right? It's one thing to sort of think about a process intellectually. It's another to, like, sit down and do it, right? So if you are able to, you know, there's a website called rankvote.co. It gives you an opportunity to set up your own ballots, kind of play a game in that way. So if you have a group, you have the ability to do that. That's really awesome. But if not, even having sort of a printed ballot, getting people familiar with it, right? Ballots are long and complicated. Get them familiar with it, have them see it, and that's going to, you know, pop up a lot of questions in your mind, and then you're able to sort of answer them, walk them through it, give them some practice. Really getting a chance to experience it, I think, is our biggest takeaway.
Well, thank you so much for sharing not only your knowledge, your experience, but also your suggestions for what other orgs can do to help promote ranked choice voting. It will take a village, and today was just an opportunity to give you some ideas as to what the challenge is and what some other strategies and opportunities are for us to all get engaged. With that, I'll turn it to our fearless leader, Mr. Bonilla.
I don't know so much about fearless leader, but in terms of, thank you so much for everything you've covered, both at the national the citywide and the most local level. I think the nonprofit and civic leaders will be gaining a lot of useful information from here. In terms of the most local election coming up, and just in citywide basis, what constitutes, what would you say is the best way to communicate what constitutes an invalid ballot? Like, right, like what not to do? I know you in your website for the campaign finance board says don't do two number ones, or don't do something on the same column. Like, can you just very specifically tell the attendees what to be communicating in terms of like what not to do?
Yeah, this is a great question. Our website highlights this really strongly because for folks who are voting by absentee, they don't have the benefit of having a poll worker to ask a question to if they don't know the answer to how to fill out their ballot. So we want to emphasize for folks that you do not want to overvote, which is when you rank two candidates for the same rank. Basically, you don't want to do that because if I'm the ballot scanner, I put my ballot into the ballot scanner, it basically doesn't know who you're trying to vote for. It can't compute. And so and it's the same as what would happen in a single choice election. If you voted for two candidates, there's no way to compute for that. So you don't want to vote for two candidates for the same rank. And we recommend folks as well do not vote for the same candidate for all ranks. So don't vote for Juan Rosa for 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The reason why is you miss out on all of the fun of ranked choice voting. It's basically the same as voting for Juan for just one. There's no place to go on your ballot after Juan gets eliminated if he loses a round. So you don't want to do that either. Don't rank two candidates for the same rank, and don't rank the same candidate for all ranks.
But for the first one, in terms of ranking the same candidate twice, no, two different candidates as your first preference, that will invalidate your ballot. But in terms of making Juan Rosa 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, that will not invalidate your ballot.
Correct.
Right.
So the cool thing about the ballot scanners is if you put your ballot into the ballot scanner, it will reject your ballot if you overvote. So if you vote for two candidates for the same rank, it will spit it back out and say you need to complete a new ballot if you vote in person early or on election day. But that's why I'm highlighting this particularly for absentee voters. You want to make sure you check your ballot and make sure that you're voting for just one candidate for each rank. You're voting for a different candidate for each rank.
Thank you so much. And for Maria or Rose, I mean, we just came off of, I think the American citizenry, the American population have gotten a lot of math education in the last year or so, right? With the electoral college, with the general election, with congressional and senate votes, like we get math, both for Maria and Rose. So what is, you know, it can be pretty powerful for a candidate who, let's say, gets 42%, and the next candidate only gets 38% on election night. That candidate with 42%, they're the victor, right? I got more votes, so I won. Well, how do we explain, you know, or add it to me? Well, no, you know, this is a 50.1%, and now we have to go to the final, drop the last candidate, if you will.
So your question is, how do you explain the math to people?
Yeah, the math, and also getting ahead of it. We just came out of a year's, like, almost national trauma, in a sense, where you have to have voter results the same night, right? It has to be the same night, unless, if not, it's not legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm ahead on the night of the election, I actually won, didn't I?
Right. So this is like a misinformation problem that we're having nationwide, right? So I think that this is a key thing, and I do this work in every jurisdiction where I work in implementation, is to work with the media to make sure that they know what to expect, right? So that if you're not getting results immediately the first moment that results are available, right? That the media is not blowing up this thing like, what's going on? There's something illegitimate going on here. So having a partnership with folks who are going to be reporting on this is really important. But back to communicating with the voters about this, what I like to say, I mean, I like to stay away from the math as much as possible because in my experience, people don't even care about it. But there's the occasional voter who's going to ask about this. What I say is, think of it as this is a runoff election without you having to go back to the polls, right? So your first choice candidate is the candidate you love, the candidate that you want to win, and the candidate you would vote on the first round of an election. What ranked choice voting allows you to do is to identify your backup choices, right? So like, who would you vote for in the runoff? You can do that on your ballot without having to go back to the polls. So just think about it that way. Your vote is going to stay with your favorite candidate, and stay with that candidate only if they get eliminated because they don't have enough popular support to be viable. Will then your vote be counted for your next choice? It's your backup choice. It's like you ranking the number 2, number 3 choices is equivalent to you deciding to show up to the runoff election. And people tend to get that without getting into the math of it.
Great point. Rose, I see you wanted to.
Sure. I think just to follow up on what Maria just said is also, this is why I think doing these mock elections are really important, because if you go to the mock election that I just posted in the chat, it will show you each of the rounds and what happened in those rounds. I also know that the Board of Elections is very committed to ensuring that these elections are as transparent as possible. And just also keep in mind, since you did bring up the presidential, Aldrin, is that if you remember to this last election cycle, for example, we did not have a verified winner until Saturday. So like all other election nights, what you are getting is, you know, that first round, the unofficial count, because like other elections, you've got to count same day, early voting, affidavit, and absentee ballots, and that's going to take a while. So we need to make sure, as Maria said, that we must set expectations for voters, and that means also another opportunity to partner with community-based organizations, civic leaders, religious leaders, and organizations like the CFB and Rank the Vote NYC to make sure that we are setting all of those expectations for those who are going to be watching, and for those who may feel like, yes, I got 42% of the vote, and why now that's going to trigger the rounds because no one got 50% plus 1 of the vote.
That's a great point. In terms of the responsibilities and the onus on civic leaders and nonprofit leaders and media, you know, we have this instant gratification type thing where we have to know the results, or we have to report out the results on the night of the election. And if not, something nefarious or something dubious is happening. We need to really push back on that, because it's important to get it right. And getting it right means all the things that you said, Rose, in terms of allowing for the military ballots, the absentee, the affidavits, and then to the extent that no one gets 50.1 or more, allowing for then the Board of Elections to undergo their due diligence and do what it is they need to do to reallocate the votes from, you know, whichever candidates came in 5th place, 4th, and so on. So I think that's really, leadership has to really rise up on the occasion of election night and the subsequent days, so that people's, you know, anxieties or fervor around elections don't really undermine the reforms that we're actually trying to implement.
If I could just add one more thing, Aldrin, is that we have an example that we can follow right now. So the race that just happened in Queens, one of the candidates got 38% of the vote, the other one 35%, which triggered the rounds, and they're in the process of doing the counting of votes, and hopefully as well as absentee affidavit ballots as well. So it's a great opportunity and an example to see, and certainly in the Bronx, we'll have 2 additional examples for the public, whether they live in the district or not, just for the purpose of following and just to see how these races will be talked about, and just another further example on how to understand RCV.
Thank you for that. Juan, you have any questions from the social media platforms or the chat room?
Yes, there's a question in the chat from Phyllis, and Phyllis asked, how can an individual get involved in ranked choice voting on a district basis? So how can, at the district level, I'm guessing city council district level, how can individuals get involved? So any of the panelists, I want to take that on and answer Phyllis's question.
I'm happy to take a crack at just pitching yet again to sign up for the CFB's Train the Trainer presentations. The way that it's designed is specifically for community organizations who are working on the ground, and it's you're basically going to take away enough information and knowledge about ranked choice voting that we will help you to create trainings for your own community. You can use our template, and like Maria was talking about, like emphasizing the issues that are the most important to your district or to the constituents that you serve at your organization. So attending the Train the Trainer and getting a better sense of ranked choice voting so that you can answer questions is super powerful. From the district perspective, I think Rose also mentioned this, but Jose is also a part of an organization that's on the ground in local districts. So it's really important to be able to speak to your community members about the issues that matter to them, and being able to ground your training of ranked choice voting in those same issues too.
Yeah, if I could jump in, you know, at Chaya, we led a lot of the efforts in CD24, but we partnered with a ton of other organizations to do the work that are really embedded in the community. So I just suggest, you know, reaching out, whether it's funded work or not funded work. The work is going to be happening because as community members, as community-based organizations, we think that it's important. So just reach out to local organizations. You know, you might be surprised. You know, we worked with India Home as an example I mentioned before. You know, they do a lot of senior services, and yet they were engaged in this work with us. Jahaji Sisters, who does work around gender-based violence. A lot of organizations get involved in this work. So, you know, reach out to them, see if they're engaging in the work, and see if there are volunteer opportunities there.
I'd like to add just very
go ahead, Maria.
That, you know, the importance of having a trusted messenger. We've talked about this before, but you know, the community-based organizations are embedded in the community. Sometimes they've been there for decades, right? So they're trusted messengers, but you as an individual who live in your apartment building, who interact with your neighbors at the laundry room, right? That's a trusted messenger too. And I can't stress enough the importance of getting into like every single nook and cranny, because even if you have a great community organization that's doing great work in your neighborhood, some of your neighbors are not going to interact with that organization, right? So like your role as an individual who lives in your block is key, and you should be talking to everybody about this.
Thank you. Rose, you have anything to share on that?
I think all of our panelists just outlined some really good ideas. And I think this is a tremendous organizing effort and a great opportunity as New York City regains and gets back on its feet. It's an opportunity, like Maria said, to be in every nook and cranny. And to the person who asked the question, there's so many organizations that you can not only align yourself, but I agree, just organizing something through your tenant association, right? So I think about entities like NYCHA, a really important constituency of New Yorkers that needs to be trained on that. So I hope that many of the organizations that are represented here throughout New York City also have the opportunity to think about what are the key constituencies that may not be on, you know, an iPhone as dependently as the rest of us are, and to think of creative ways to do outreach, whether as it gets warmer, maybe we do something fun in the park, maybe we do something in front of supermarkets that are demonstrations, to Maria's point about what the what is, and how to actually understand the ballot and execute. So I know with the organizations that you have represented here, I know Chaya did. I followed all of Chaya's work, and Jose, it was tremendous work. I think we have some best practices, which I hope maybe from this consortium of organizations that there can be some best practices shared, and that there's a repository for that.
Yeah, thank you so much to the four of you for offering those answers and for sharing your knowledge and your experience. I'm going to turn it to Aldrin so he could close us out, but I just wanted to say thanks so much to again, the four panelists for giving us their time, for sharing your institutional knowledge, your experience, and your ideas. And I want to just say to the audience members that this was not just a presentation, it's really a call to action. It's going to take a lot of us to talk to our neighbors, talk to our parish goers, our church goers, talk to our tenant associations, our block associations, our precinct council, precinct community council, wherever we come together, our schools, which are very important. New York City is going to engage in a process of recovery and reimagining for the next 4 years. And it's really important for every New Yorker to get a chance to express their ideas and their feelings as to how our city should look like and should be investing in the next 4 years. So it's our duty to help them express their voice. So it's a call to action. And with that, I want to turn it over to Aldrin to close us out.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. I want to thank Juan and Aleo. I want to thank all of our panelists. I think today you've heard, we hope that we've been hopeful in the cause to get people to understand ranked choice voting. We tried to go over the what, right? Ranked choice voting, the how in terms of preferences from 1 to 5, in terms of the where in your polling sites, through absentee ballots, through affidavits, through military ballots, the when, right? We have the big election coming up, the primary in June, but then we have elections that early voting started as early as Saturday for the 2 Bronx districts. So that's important that folks start. Early voting is a good thing also that allows people to have more time with their ballot, right? And if they need to ask questions. Ultimately, I think each of the panelists personify the why, right? Because we care deeply about democracy. We care that people are represented faithfully. And we care that the issues that are most relevant to people rise to the top of the agenda. And I think ranked choice voting is one tool in many that will help innovate and improve our current democracy to bring more people around the table and more people around the decision making. And I dare say that the panelists here also made it seem fun, right? It's fun. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be your first or second choice. It can be a combination of, speaking to your neighbors, of what, is most beneficial to the communities that we all come from. And I think nonprofit leaders and civic leaders as trusted messengers and having the ear to the ground and their work in the community is going to be indispensable, is going to be critical to getting the message out to voters, to letting them know that this is really to create more opportunities, a better representation for them and for the issues confronted daily. So I think the why is something you've all communicated so clearly today. So I want to thank you all for that. And I know for you, this, for many of you, this has been a long journey. And to just end on that quote, this is a big freaking deal. It's a big freaking deal. And New York City will be the largest implementation of this in the United States. So it's very important that we do this, as Juan mentions, with the most accurate and best information and being as reflective as possible in terms of what the impact and effects will be. And I think many will have much time to discuss that in the future. So thank you all. Thank all the attendees and the nonprofits that attended and listened in. There's been a lot of resources shared in the chat room. If you click on the 3 little buttons in the bottom of the chat room, you can save the chat. So all the attendees can save the chat for themselves if they have not had an opportunity to jot down the resources. But I think many different exercises and activities have been shared today that you can do with your nonprofits and in the various communities. So I'd just like to thank everyone again. Thank Juan Rosa, who is really the convener here and had the idea to approach the Fund for the City of New York to help create this platform for nonprofit leaders and civic leaders. So thank you all and have a great afternoon. Get outside and enjoy the weather.